Hello everyone, I'm Neeraj Dangol and I'm going to present how informal settlement residents' socioeconomic characteristics influence their flood adaptation, taking a case of Kathmandu. This is based on a part of my PhD research. First of all, I'm going to briefly introduce my overall research so that it will be clear which part of it this presentation is based on. Then I will explain case study settlements, then flood impacts they have been experiencing, and flood adaptations the informal residents have been implementing. Afterwards, I will discuss influence of socioeconomic characteristics on their flood adaptation. In my research, I investigated how perception of tenure security, perception of flood risk, and socioeconomic characteristics combinedly affect the flood adaptation of housing by riverbank informal residents. Perception of tenure security can be simply understood as a level of fear being evicted from the settlement or lack of that fear. Because the informal settlements are considered illegal and there is always a risk of being evicted by the government. And perception of flood risk can be understood as a level of fear of flood impacts. In this presentation, I'm going to show only findings on how socioeconomic factors influence the flood adaptation. Findings of this research is based on 40 semi-structured interviews of informal households and observations of adaptation measures implemented by them. So, if you don't know, Kathmandu is the capital city of Nepal. Nepal is situated between India and China, and this is the aerial view or satellite image of Kathmandu. This purple line is the boundary of Kathmandu metropolitan city, and these red dots are the locations of my case study settlements situated along the Bagmati river. This blue line indicates that river, and this is the largest river of the city. And these yellow dots are locations of other informal settlements in the city. This is part of one of those case study settlements. As we can see, this is the Bagmati river, and informal houses are we can see at the both sides of the river, and these tall buildings at back, they are our formal neighborhoods. This is another settlement where if you look at the picture carefully, you can see this river at back. This is Bagmati river, and all this whole area is a part of another case study settlement. This picture, I'm showing this picture to explain that how these informal settlements are at flood risk. This picture at the right side is from 1960s, and These cylindrical drums kind of structure, stone structure we can see in here, this inside the yellow circle. These are the similar structure we can see in this 1960s picture. So in the course of time, the river became narrower, and now these houses, informal houses, are situated on the land where the river used to flow in the past. So when it rains heavy during the monsoon season, the river level increases and the river tends to reclaim its land, which puts these riverbank informal settlements at higher risk. So monsoon season is, it starts around from June and July, September, June, July, August, September. So these 4 months are considered the monsoon season when it rains heavy in Nepal and that South Asian region. So these are some of the pictures showing how flood incidents affect these settlements every year. Actually, several times during the monsoon season, and actually this week also, the same settlements got flooded by the heavy rain because now this monsoon season is running, and frequent heavy rains is also occurring in Nepal and in Kathmandu nowadays. And as these settlements are considered illegal, they do not get any help or support from the government. Actually, instead they are always at fear of getting evicted by the government because they are considered illegal settlement. So this picture at the lower right corner, this picture shows the example of forceful eviction of a settlement by the government. Talking about flood impacts on informal settlement residents, they get affected by various ways, as reported by interviews, as in their lives, particularly to their children's lives, are at higher risk. Some of them experienced getting trapped inside the flooded house in the midnight, and some of them had to escape through their roofs. So in addition, their houses also get damaged and their belongings get washed away. In addition to that, the flood water gets mixed with sewerage, and this kind of stagnated water stayed there for a few days, and it becomes the favorable conditions for waterborne and vector-borne diseases and skin infections. And due to these impacts, many of these residents could not go for their work for several days, which affect their livelihood. This is the picture from another settlement, which I took around 4 or 5 days after the flood incident. And it also shows that how water gets collected for a few days after the incident. Based on interviews and observations, I identify these adaptation measures. This is the list of adaptation measures implemented by residents, mainly in their houses. I listed out these identified measures and ranked them according to their effectiveness. Ranking was done based on how residents found these measures effective in resisting a flood, and also based on consultations with the 2 structural engineers working in Kathmandu. Let's see some examples of these flood adaptation. In this picture, we can see sandbags wall. supported by bamboo sticks. And also we can see different kind of materials are used to build a wall facing towards the river. So here we can see bamboo is used to build wall. So maybe this is the example of houses. In the beginning they build, and after some time they change it to this kind of corrugated tin sheet wall. Just as an example, like how they improve their practices to reduce flood risk. And after some time, if they can afford, then they try to build their houses, they or upgrade, at least upgrade the wall facing to the river by brick. As we can see, it's small. This portion at the right corner is a brick wall house. This is the another example of sandbag walls, use of sandbag walls to protect washing away of soil. So, and as we can see, these measures are temporary because after 2-3 months, these sandbags gets damaged, and these residents they keep on spending on these adaptation measures. In this picture, we can see some of these houses have upper floors or raised floors. This is also an example of flood adaptation. They add or raise the floor levels to protect themselves and their belongings in the time of flooding. They also fill this kind of a land or pathways with sand and soils, which acts as barrier between houses and the river. Here also this added floor helped them to protect their belongings and themselves at the time of this kind of flooding time. This picture is a good example to show how they implement adaptation incrementally. The roof used to be at this level, and when they found the river level is increasing in the time of floods, they fill the ground outside the house with soil and sand, and then they increase the floor level in the house and the door level also. So consequently, they had to move their roof up to have the clear height. And this visible plastic covered bamboo wall will be built as a brick wall gradually when they have money for it. And these different layers of materials here in another house also indicates that the wall was raised gradually. The important findings in the thesis is the combined influence of the perceived tenure security, perceived flood risks, and socioeconomic conditions on the adaptation. So when they influence together, um, in some cases, some of them became more influential than others, and in other cases, another one had a more influential role. And which one can be primary influencer depends on their priorities and necessities. But from here, like, I'm going to discuss more on socioeconomic factors and their influence on residents' adaptation decision. I also gathered information on respondents' household and socioeconomic characteristics as shown in this table. They are helpful to understand their views on how these characteristics can be influential on their adaptation. These features include family size, household head, gender, and caste and ethnicity. So, such as most of the household size is 4 to 6 people, and most of the household heads are male, of age between 31 to 50, and most of them have monthly income of less than 1500 rupees, which is less than 200 Australian dollar. Many of them work in the building construction related casual work or work as a street vendor. And many of them are either illiterate or just literate or went to up to elementary school. And I also looked at their relationship with neighbors and their engagement in community activities. So this table summarizes the responses on how residents find these socioeconomic elements are influential or not on their decision making or adaptation. For example, they think a family size and the household head age and their monthly income and relationship with the neighbors. So they are highly influential in their adaptation decision, whereas caste and ethnicity, engagement in community activities, and education, they are comparatively less influential according to their perspective. Let's see some examples of the interview quotes, and I try to explain how they perceive their socioeconomic elements influence their adaptation decision. So regarding household size, some of them have a large family and they find hard to fulfill their daily necessities. So that made flood adaptation less priority for them. Whereas some of them who have a small family think if they had a bigger family, they could implement flood adaptation measures by themselves without asking or hiring other workers. Most of them say age matters a lot because they think when they get older, they have less confidence and less strength to do physical work. And it makes sense because for them, hiring workers is additional expenses and they prefer to do by themselves. In terms of gender, some female respondents find difficult to manage implementation of adaptation measures along with their other responsibilities when their husband is not at home. They find this adaptation implementation of adaptation requires lots of physical strength and it is hard for female. Some of them also mention that finding workers and dealing with them is also more difficult for women. Whereas there are some female respondents who do not find gender makes that much big difference because they think money is more important factor. Looking at caste and ethnicity, it is interesting that to find this what they say, because caste and ethnicity based discriminations are still experienced in Nepalese society. However, most of the respondents from these informal settlements find that such discriminations are not found in informal settlements and consequently it doesn't influence their adaptation. Some of them mentioned skill is more important or money is more important for the adaptation. And based on their response, it, it can be understood that they feel united because of their common problems and discriminative behaviors by outsider towards informal settlers. So I think these things united them and overshadowed the caste ethnicity based discrimination. among them. And as obvious, income is the substantial factor that affects their adaptation. If they don't have enough money, they cannot afford to have better adaptation measures, although they know implementing these stronger adaptation measures could reduce their flood impacts. Similarly, if they find hard to manage money for their daily necessities, then they may not be able to spend for adaptation at all. Uh, Regarding occupation, who are working in building construction related job, they find it's easier for them to implement adaptation measures because they have skills and tools for that. And who are doing casual work in informal economy, such as working as a street vendors, they have to sacrifice their income for the days when they get busy in implementing these adaptation measures. It is it is interesting to find that many of them think education doesn't make that much difference in their flood adaptation, because some of them think they don't need expertise as an engineer to build what they are building, and some think they have learned the skill by doing and they have better understanding of it than any educated people from outside. However, some think that they could do better if they were educated. In terms of engagement in community activity, many of them, they don't find that much helpful, whereas some appreciate that they get some suggestions from others in the community when they involve in these community activities. Unlike engagement in community, they find relationship with their neighbors is crucial in influencing their flood adaptation. Some of the respondents have good relationships with their neighbors and they successfully implemented flood adaptation measures together. Doing so, they share the flood risks equally, and also they could save their money because they bought materials and help each other in construction. Whereas who have conflicts with their neighbors found that it affected their flood adaptation and put them at higher risk. So for example, when they could not cooperate with their neighbors, they implemented flood adaptation as their wish. So for example, when a resident increase their house level higher than their neighbors, then floodwater tends to flow more to the neighbor's house at the lower level, which put their neighbors at higher flood risk. At the end, I would like to summarize that this research introduced the informal settlers' perspective on the factors, including socioeconomic features that influence their flood adaptation. Understanding this, this informal settlement residents' perspective is important because they make decisions based on it. Analyzing their perceptions regarding flood adaptation also provides a different perspective of adaptive capacities to hazard risk. Understanding their perspective is important to comprehend how people locally understand restrictions and motivations to prevent damages from hazards. As we saw examples of socioeconomic factors, some of them are restrictions and some of them are motivations for them to implement self-initiated adaptations, which are important in providing safety for their survival. In addition, if governments want to consider Safety of informal settlers. Although governments may not tend to help directly, but they can do something for socioeconomic empowerment that can be beneficial for flood adaptation of informal dwellers, enhancing their safety and survival. This could be also encouraging for informal settlers' future participation and negotiation with the government, not only limiting to existing disaster risk reduction, but also for their long-term solutions to address future settlers' vulnerabilities towards disasters and adversities. And it can be also encouraging their participation for resettlements as required. And thank you very much.